Up until now, Jackie had mostly been able to keep herself apart from politics, but in this moment, she had become the most important political figure in America. Jackie was property now, and there was a battle underway as to who could claim her, the Lyndon Johnsons or the Kennedys. Every moment, every photograph, every note taken, and every detail recorded would all end up in the biographies of her husband by these White House reporters. She knew this, so she knew everything had extraordinary weight in this moment. Hi, welcome back to my channel. I am Jess Cannell. We are going through Maureen Callahan's book, Ask Not. And I hope you have been enjoying the stories as much as I have. If this is your first introduction to this, then I just want to encourage you to go back because the stories we have heard have been fascinating. I do want to specifically direct you to episode 2. Episode 2 is called Jackie Bouvier Kennedy, and it is the story of Jackie and Jack and their courtship and their marriage. But it's all told through the back and forth timeline of the day that JFK was assassinated. So if you're interested in Jackie Kennedy, I think you'll want to go back and listen to that episode. Today's episode is called Jackie Kennedy the Mythmaker. Jackie would not recall much of her time at Valley Head. It was Jack who had put her there, seeking a cure for her depression, the black moods that had plagued her since childhood. It was a mental asylum, and they were a new couple at this point. She was walking around like she was the lone survivor of a plane crash. That was the analogy that she used. Jack couldn't deal with Jackie's upset, and nor did he care to, so off to Valley Head she went. This famous Massachusetts institution had treated other very prominent people, so it wasn't as if there was much shame attached to it for her. Here, Jackie underwent 3 rounds of electroshock therapy in 1 week. Each time she shook so violently it sounded like her bones were breaking. Jack never came to see her. He never called. She spent her days dodging the other patients, forcing down inedible food, and attempting to use the bathroom in private. She was without her 2 greatest comforts since childhood, her horses and her books. Jacqueline Bouvier Kennedy, dignity her most prized possession, was barefoot and barely dressed in a hospital gown, her husband nowhere to be found. After that week at Valley Head, Jack sent an aide to bring her home. He escorted Jackie into the DC townhouse. Jack was not there. Her husband hadn't even left a note. Jackie was truly alone. She felt like such an embarrassment. What a failure. Ethel and Jack's siblings were right. Jackie was as soft as they all said. It hadn't seemed possible, but Jackie felt more hopeless now than she had at the asylum. The parameters of their marriage were very clear to her now. Jackie was the political prop, and she needed to accept it. Anger, sadness, needs, wants. She needed to pack all those complicated emotions out of sight and just get with the program. Medicate yourself, travel, go on shopping trips, whatever it takes. You stay docile while your husband conquers the world. On November 27th, 1957, Jackie gave birth to their first child, bringing Jack and Jackie closer than ever. They named her Caroline, after Jackie's sister, whose given name was Caroline Lee. Jack was the first person Jackie saw when she came to, and it was he, not a nurse, wheeling the infant into her hospital room. She would often refer to this as the happiest day of her life. You think about that after what we've read even so far into this book is her father's womanizing, her pressure from her mother, of course, the most horrific day of her life, the assassination, and even the mental hospital stay with electroshock treatments. But now we're given this little glimpse of something wonderful in Jackie's life, something where she is truly happy. So she could carry a baby to term. Her baby was healthy, and for now, she was free of Jack's sexually transmitted diseases that had given her multiple miscarriages and stillbirths before. She felt like she and Jack were a real family. She could have another child if she wanted, and another. Jack was just as elated and very proud of her. I love this moment, this little peek in their family's life, like they're cocooned in this little newborn world with their baby. They finally have been successful. She's carried a child to term, and she feels like a real family. There's such weight behind those words. Dr. Frank Finnerty was young, only 37, but a distinguished cardiologist and professor when Jackie met him on the Cape in spring of 1961. He had been called over to the Kennedy compound to treat Jackie for an injured ankle. In our very first episode, we heard about this, that Jackie's caution to Carolyn had to do with, hey, don't be so rowdy. You could get very injured. Watch out. These Kennedy men can be rough. Well, she has an injured ankle. Dr. Finnerty is called to treat her ankle, and he seems very kind and grounded. Something about him made Jackie pick up the phone a week later. She began by telling him how her ankle was doing, and then asked a favor. "Would you mind," she said, "if I called you once in a while? Just to talk, just to get an outside opinion on things." Jackie would reach out to him, never the other way around. She didn't need a physician as much as she needed a friend. "I know what's going on," she told him. "I'm not dumb or naive like people around my husband think. I know exactly what he's up to." There were so many women that Jackie didn't even know all of their names. She starts talking to the doctor. She suspected even that her sister Lee had slept with her husband just once and never said a thing. She knew about Jack and Pamela, her own assistant. She knew about Jack's euphemistic pool parties held almost every day in the White House, often attended by his brothers Ted and Bobby, and by various lackeys at the White House. And she knew about the 2 White House secretaries that would join them. Women ran up and down the back stairs whenever Jackie was away, leaving blonde hairs and bobby pins, dripping water, passing their half-finished drinks to Secret Service agent while they scurried out the door, no doubt having just heard that the First Lady was on her way home. There was a time Jackie found in her and Jack's White House bed a strange pair of underwear. Listen to how she addresses this. "Would you please shop around and find out who these belong to?" she asked Jack. "They're not my size." That seems really, really snarky for my opinion of Jackie O. I kind of feel like, all right, okay, she's spunky. She knew about his penchant for picking up girls while traveling and having 3-ways, 4-ways, 5-ways, swapping hookers with his buddies. She knew about the 15-year-old babysitter that Jack had gotten pregnant back when he was senator. The rumors were true. She had cut a deal with Joe back then, $1 million not to leave the marriage. Many millions more if Jack ever gave her a sexually transmitted disease again. Jackie really didn't think that Jack loved any of these women. He treated them like the help. They came when he called, they left when he told them to, and they were led to expect nothing from him. But she was sick of keeping the problems in her marriage a secret. "Jack needs to expel some kind of hormonal surge," she told the doctor. "I don't think he even has affection for them. It's just this intrinsic part of his life, a vicious trait he inherited from his father." Well, there was one woman, she said, that did bother her, Marilyn Monroe. She didn't go into detail, but the doctor intuited that no other woman made Jackie as insecure. A little plug on that. If you are interested in the interns that she's talking about, the little White House secretaries, that's episode 3. Episode 4 was Marilyn Monroe. Jackie had never talked so freely. In Dr. Finnerty, she had found a true confidant. His trustworthiness, his lack of judgment or shock, and his ability to come at problems with practical and clinical solutions gave her the courage to share her most private dilemma, her sex life with her husband. "For a man with such a libido," she said, "Jack was terrible in bed." She hadn't had many experiences before she was married, but she did want more from her husband. Was this her fault? "He just goes too fast and falls asleep," she said. Little did she know that this was the complaint of every woman who had sex with Jack Kennedy. No kissing, no buildup, no intensity or sensuality or fun. He just attacked you like a dog humping a leg. He never lasted longer than 3 minutes and didn't even seem to enjoy sex. There was never anything remotely personal about it for him. Jackie couldn't abide. She and Jack were so well matched, especially intellectually. He relied on her for her emotional radar. No one could see through people like Jackie. When they had visited Paris that spring, Jack credited Jackie's instant rapport with President de Gaulle. The French leader was rapt with attention as she spoke to him fluently in French about her love of French history, cultural differences, architecture, things that she loved, and it won President de Gaulle over. Jack famously went on to refer to himself as, quote, "the man who accompanied Jackie Kennedy to Paris, and I have enjoyed it." The crowd roared, but Jack meant every word. That trip had been a major victory for the Kennedy administration, and Jackie deserved the credit. As First Lady, she was becoming what she had previously joked about, overall art director of the 20th century. You know, when we think about like mid-century modern and fashion, some of the most unique parts of the 20th century were things that were edited and curated and chosen by Jackie. Without making him feel less than, Jackie had also turned Jack into an exacting clothes horse. Now he could swiftly discern between what was good and terrible fashion. He came to value aesthetics, and he began to understand the importance of them. Jackie helped him see that choosing beauty in your clothing or in your personal furniture and style was not frivolous or feminine, that it was a way to nourish the soul, that it was a way also to communicate an advanced public image. He was the first president to cultivate real style, and Jack let Jackie take the lead in remaking his image, one that had never been seen before in the US. He was cool. And then there was her mind. So she had helped him with his fashion. She helped him emotionally to read other people and connect with other people. And then he loved her mind. She may have been the most well-read woman that he had ever known. They loved books, and I thought this detail was fascinating. Every Sunday, Jack would read the New York Times, and as he's reading the book review section, he would circle the titles that interested him. And by the end of the week, he'd have there on his nightstand a stack of books from the ones that he had circled. His wife took care of him intellectually. Well, Jackie wants their physical connection to be as satisfying and unique and mutually gratifying as their intellectual connection. What could she do to bring her husband around? Finnerty listened, and he is just agog that this most famous woman in the world, with a life that most people assume is pretty perfect and remarkable, is being so candid. And he didn't take her trust lightly. He advised her that she should proceed gingerly. I think this is really good input, actually. If you're a wife and there's things that you need to talk to that are very sensitive about your husband, I think this next section is really insightful. He advises her to proceed gingerly. "Jackie," he said, "you must not risk offending Jack or making him feel like less of a man. Tell him you feel left out. Tell him you need more affection, that foreplay would be his gift to you. Have the talk over a meal or in some non-threatening way, and approach it like any other problem two smart people can tackle together, logically and unemotionally." I think that's really interesting. You know, even as I read it, I thought I can hear some viewers' potential responses of like, why do men need to be treated different than women? And the truth is that men and women are different. We just are. It doesn't mean that every woman displays total emotional and irrationality. And it doesn't mean that every man is just hard and difficult and kind of slow and not emotionally connected. It doesn't mean any of that. What it does mean is that we do have bents. There are certain things, and this one of emotions versus facts is one of the personality dimensions that if you do personality research, you start to see some traits like extrovert and introvert don't have sex-based percentages, but certain traits like emotional, intuition, and anxiety, concern for others, empathy, certain traits are typically more feminine. And so he's advising her, go at it in a very rational, calm way, not when you're in a threatening time, and do it in a way that's like, hey, we got to tackle this problem together. I think that's really good input. What do you think? Well, Jackie did just that, and Jack's response surprised her. He had no idea that sex was so important to her. Her interest impressed him. How had a nice girl like her become so well versed in all things sexual? So he's super naive. We see this man who's like, humping strangers like a dog, and he doesn't even realize that there could be something more gratifying and more connective. And if we think back to a couple episodes ago when we talked about Kik and the differences between how Kik was raised to be a virgin, to be very asexual in her first 25 years of life, and then Jack, who from teenage years was being left porn by his dad on the bed with certain scenes open to him right away. This is not accidental. Jack didn't come by this view that, how did a nice girl like you care about this? He thinks that girls don't have any interest in this. And he's surprised. Like, how did you come to know about these things? Jackie and Jack both thought of themselves as actors. Jack knew that he was a product, packaged and sold by his father. But he didn't much mind. He loved Hollywood. He loved movie stars. He loved celebrity. He loved being in VIP rooms and having access to anything he ever wanted. Jackie was more complicated. She was more introspective. She liked to keep her circle close. She trusted few people. And so she felt like she had to camouflage the spicier parts of her personality. She didn't show her wit to just anybody. And even the rebellious nature that she had, she kept these things more hidden. And she begins cultivating a public image very intentionally. For example, never was a hair out of place because she seldom wore her own hair. Wigs made for a more pleasant picture, she decided. As she comes into the spotlight, women did not reject or resent her as a snob or as out of reach. They began to admire her youth and composure. They saw her beauty and appreciated it. And so Jackie came to really enjoy being famous. She learned to quiet her inner self and transform herself into a character called Jacqueline Kennedy. Who wouldn't want to be her? A woman of destiny with beauty and style, 2 beautiful children, and a devoted husband who just happened to be the most powerful man on earth. Of course, she was creating a character from the ground up. And if she did it just right, with Jack eager to play along, then Jack and Jackie Kennedy would not just be historic, but they would be iconic. The White House was her set. Chanel suits and mink stoles were her wardrobe. Her in-laws were supporting players. All the toothy, athletic ruggedness of the Kennedys was the perfect foil for Jackie's graceful elegance and reserve. She did begin shopping, just as she had been expected to do to deal with the infidelity. Acquiring rare, expensive things filled a hole in Jackie, to be sure. And like all great stars, she knew when to decline comment. She knew when to play dumb and when to disappear, as she did on the night in May 1962 when Marilyn Monroe, dressed in a shimmering, skin-tight nude gown in front of a packed Madison Square Garden, and the entire world cooed "Happy birthday" to her husband as he sat in the audience, all but announcing that she and the married president were having an affair. Jackie was a student of art and cinema, and she knew the power of silence. She knew her absence that night would be infinitely more powerful than her presence. So she stayed on their rented farm in Virginia with her children and her horses, sending a public, careful, non-verbal message. Your First Lady shares your values, and she is also appalled. The trappings of celebrity and garish shows are not for her. She is happiest taking care of her small children, far from the spotlight. A spectacle such as that is far beneath her. It's important to note that Jackie did not think that Jack was mean. She just thought he was careless. After so many near-death experiences, heartless neglect in childhood, never once being touched affectionately by his mother, never so much as his hair being tousled, she could understand his impulsivity. She could even justify it. But this particular mortification was different. It hurt Jackie deeply. Was this revenge for all that she had done for him? Was he jealous of her fame? Of the inner strength that allowed her to survive the loss of so many babies and his constant infidelities? This was the second time that Jackie thought she really would leave. She gave him an ultimatum, and she meant it. No more contact with Marilyn Monroe. Otherwise, she would divorce him and take the children, and it would cost him re-election, and the American people would know why. Jack complied immediately, and Jackie once again felt her power. I don't know about y'all, but I am glad to see her finally say, no more, not doing this. She may not have said it to all the women, but she did say it to the one that she was most concerned about and in the most public humiliation. She knew intuitively that there's only so much that the American people could abide, but I think also it went beyond what the American people could abide. I think she could not abide Marilyn Monroe. Now we're taken to Dallas. After her husband's casket was loaded onto Air Force One in Dallas, Jackie sat alone in the plane in her blood-spattered pink Chanel suit. Everyone was weeping, even the Secret Service. Some were panicked, convinced that they were still a target. Jackie had gone into the plane's rear bathroom and cleaned her face and hair of Jack's blood and brains. She had been shocked upon boarding Air Force One to find Lyndon Johnson, the sheer physical enormity of him splayed out on the bed. Where was his decorum? How could he not assume that she would head to the bedroom, that she might need her privacy? Lyndon had so quickly assumed the mantle and the room of the president. Her husband had only been dead for 2 hours. She stood before him in disbelief. I should have left the blood on my face, she thought to herself. I should have let them see what they've done. The rest of her body was still splattered with Jack's blood. One leg was slathered in it. Her gold bracelet caked in his blood. She was still covered in death. Lyndon hastily roused himself and left without a word, his secretary fast behind him. As a side note, there are several books that discuss the role of LBJ and whether or not he had a hand in or prior knowledge of the potential for an assassination here. I could be interested in one of those books, and if you're interested, let me know in the comments, please. Well, laid out for her on the president's bed was a clean white dress. Who had put it there? No matter. Jackie had no intention of changing into it. She knew that that dress, originally intended for a campaign stop in Austin, would seemingly and visually whitewash the fresh slaughter of her husband. Lyndon, like all bullies, was a coward at the core. He always was giving orders while making his staffers watch him sit on the toilet or urinate in his sink or brandish his part in front of his female secretaries. But he was different with Jackie. Despite the mutual loathing between him and her husband, he was kind to her and gentlemanly. She seemed to draw that out of him, and Jackie liked him. Now, as he came back into the bedroom with his wife, Lady Bird Johnson, Lyndon searched for the right words. "Honey," he said. He put his arm around her, but left it to his wife from there on. and Jackie had much in common with her. They both knew the pain of your famous husband's philanderings. So he left her to offer condolences. "Oh, Jackie," Lady Bird said, "we never even wanted to be vice president, and now it's come to this." "What if I hadn't been there?" Jackie said. "I'm so glad I was there." It had been her first real campaign trip in years. "Can we get someone to help you put on some fresh things?" "Oh no," Jackie said, "not right now." The cabin was swelteringly hot. The fuselage is just absorbing Texas heat, and it's midday. Jackie is seated on the bed now, squeezed between the new president and the first lady. She felt trapped. "Well," he said, "about the swearing in." Of course, that's why they were here. They wanted Jackie to stand next to Lyndon as he took the oath of office. It was an image that would go around the world. Without Jackie, this sympathetic, pitied woman, Lyndon could easily lose half of the electorate. No wonder that white dress had been laid out for her. She was meant to look clean and cool. Jackie's inner image maker guided her now. The Chanel suit, blood and brains splotched and caked on the pink wool, would stay on. No matter how hot this cabin was, no matter how stiff the blood or the stench of death, only like this would she stand next to Lyndon. So we see Jackie going through her life with this sense of image and style, and she brings that even into this most important moment. And people reference this all the time. Her saying, "Let them see what they've done," was a big deal. It was a big decision, and she was the art director for that moment. "You're a brave little lady," some congressman from Texas said, and gave her an unsolicited hug. I mean, can you even imagine these little Texas men coming in and giving her a hug, and she's just like in the shock of grief. Everything about her whole world has changed in a matter of 2 or 3 hours, and this little Texas man is coming up. It'd be hard not to lose your cool in a moment like that, I think. Lyndon reaches out and takes Jackie's hand. "This is the saddest moment of my life," he said. He turns to the White House photographer. "Is this the way you want us?" Up until now, Jackie had mostly been able to keep herself apart from politics, but in this moment, she had become the most important political figure in America. Jackie was property now, and there was a battle underway as to who could claim her, the Lyndon Johnsons or the Kennedys. Every moment, every photograph, every note taken, and every detail recorded would all end up in the biographies of her husband by these White House reporters. She knew this, so she knew everything had extraordinary weight in this moment. She understood instantly the optics, and she began to control the optics and control the message. She knew she could shape how history viewed her husband. Lyndon took the oath, and the plane took off. She sat herself way back in the plane's tail, next to Jack's casket. Jack's men came to see her one by one, kneeling down in front of her. Some of them were in tears, not knowing what to say. Jack's doctor approached her gingerly. "Another dress?" he asked. "No," Jackie said. "Let them see what they've done." So that's where the famous quote comes from, and that was her mindset in this. Nope, not taking off the dress. Everybody needs to see it. This is not a clean, precious, beautiful moment. This is a terrible moment stained with blood. She summoned her husband's acting press secretary. "You make sure, Mac," she said. "You go and tell them that I came back here and I sat with Jack." All of Jack's men were surprised. The young widow Kennedy was displaying more fortitude than any of them had managed to do. She was the only one thinking 3 steps ahead. Live television, tragedy, pageantry, history. Jack's aides were all focused on more immediate concerns. When they landed in D.C., would she wear the dress that had been laid out for her? Would she want Jack's casket shielded? They're thinking in the moment. She answers their questions, but she, in every moment, is thinking about the optics. She said, We'll go out the regular way. Do not shield his coffin. We will go out where we can be seen. I want them to see what they have done. Really, why else was she suffering in this horrible blood-stained suit? Let them get their pictures, she thought. Let the news crews film me. Make sure of it. Someone raises the terrible, next necessary question. Where would Jack be buried? The men said they thought Boston, next to Patrick, next to the infant that Jack and Jackie had lost just 3 months earlier. She was still grieving that baby who had been born via cesarean section on August 7th and had lived for 2 days, struggling to breathe in a hyperbaric chamber. That was the best the doctors could do. She hadn't known the extent of Jack's anguish, that he had kept asking the doctors, will he be retarded? So fearful of what had happened to Rosemary. He made sure that Jackie saw the baby and held his hand before they moved him to another hospital. Jack never left the baby's side, and after Patrick died, he had never left hers. He must be buried in Boston, one assistant told her. Don't you let them change it. No, Jackie thought. He won't be. Interestingly, she had actually had this conversation with Jack when he was about 1 year into his time at the White House. It wasn't a morbid conversation for either of them. It was a practical one. He had said that he thought they should both be buried in Hyannis, along with all the other Kennedys, but Jackie disagreed. I think you should be buried in Arlington, she told him. You just belong to all the country. Arlington National Cemetery, for those who haven't been to Washington, D.C., is just on the outskirts of D.C. It's on a beautiful set of hills, and it's where a lot of our servicemen and women who have lost their lives are buried. It's where the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier is, and it is where he ultimately would be buried. So the plane lands at Andrews Air Force Base. Thousands of people are gathered outside. TV cameras are in place. They're all broadcasting live, and her husband's coffin is lowered to the ground. The sky was dark, which provided a black backdrop for all of this. Bobby had been waiting at Andrews Air Force Base. He boarded Air Force One as soon as it landed and went right to Jackie. When it was time to lower Jack's coffin, they stood together, Jackie's right hand clutching Bobby's, her black handbag in the other. It was a detail, a signal that only women would notice. I literally have all my bearings. I'm holding all my stuff together. So here she is with her purse on her arm. She's thinking in each moment about the imagery, which is just fascinating. I don't know that any of us would have that, but she did. She had years of training privately as a photographer, as an aspiring journalist, as an art student, and then years in the public eye that had all prepared her for noticing the optics of this moment. An ambulance took Jack's body to Bethesda for the autopsy, and the driver, Jackie makes sure, is Bill Greer, the same driver who had driven the black Cadillac carrying Jack and Jackie in Dallas when Jack was shot. She wanted this driver to know that she did not hold him to blame. She was giving him honor. She would ride in the ambulance with Bobby, the coffin between them. Now she knew this was all for Jack. Jackie was on a self-appointed mission: statecraft and stagecraft, legacy. The 3 days ahead offered Jackie a kind of respite. She could control what happened next. Woe to anyone who would dare to deny her. The funeral would be broadcast live. There would be 3 days of ceremonies. She wanted a closed coffin. Bobby Kennedy and Bob McNamara insisted it should be open, traditional with heads of state, they said. In that case, Jackie said, why don't all of you go take a look at him and tell me that you think an open casket is the dignified choice? One by one, members of the inner circle agreed. Jackie was right. She was in fighting form, and part of this was due to the fact that she was amped up on adrenaline and speed. That was another secret that she and Jack shared. Their confidential appointments with Max Jacobson. He was a German physician they called Dr. Feelgood. He shot them up with all kinds of drugs, steroids, speed, painkillers, animal hormones, bone marrow, human placenta. Neither Jack nor Jackie knew exactly what was in Feel-Good's injections. "I don't care if it's horse piss," Jack once said. "It works." The good doctor flew out to D.C. as soon as he heard, but nothing could knock Jackie out. The scotch hadn't made her sleepy, and the sedatives that the White House doctors had given her were not working. She felt like she was being tossed around in the ocean, endlessly fighting to break the surface. Who would take care of her? Her children? Where would she live? What would she do? What would become of them? She threw herself into planning all the elements of Jack's funeral. His casket with a riderless horse, the same caisson that had carried FDR, and they did decide he would be buried at Arlington. Their lost babies would be disinterred and buried alongside him, an eternal flame lighting their graves. She had gotten to that idea from a visit to the tomb of the unknown soldier in France. The flowers were to be simple, nothing overwrought. She pulled in a famed horticulturalist that had given her beautiful flower design before, so she puts her in charge of that. They decided at the grave there would just be a straw basket with the flowers from the rose garden. The garden was another aspect of beauty that Jackie had awakened in Jack. When they returned from that triumphant state visit to France, Jack had looked out the Oval Office windows and wondered why the White House had nothing comparable to the great gardens of Paris, Luxembourg. "Only those flowers and nothing else," Jackie said. "Nothing else at the grave." Jackie would lead the funeral procession, walking the quarter mile from the White House to the church behind Jack's flag-draped casket. This alarms everybody. They think she could still be a target too. They didn't know if the assassination was part of a larger national threat, but she says, "Fine, I don't care. I'm walking with Jack and I'll do it alone if I have to." She also decided no fat black Cadillacs either. They were too ugly. Everything was to be sleek and geometric, clean and purposeful. She had an eye not just toward history, but toward iconography. The young widow standing with her fatherless children on the north portico of the White House, leading the nation in this funeral march, clutching the folded American flag at her husband's grave. Their 2-year-old son, his father's namesake, stepping forward and paying tribute with a salute. Her husband's death could not be in vain. His funeral would be the first step to consecrate his memory as she saw fit. This wasn't only about history, it was to enshrine their marriage and prove her love for him as sacred and true. She demanded pomp and pageantry. She was striking a near impossible balance of grandeur with minimalism. She would show the world that this young nation could survive anything. I thought this was interesting. She had only one black dress. For a woman like Jackie Kennedy, and the way we're all led to believe now that the little black dress is the thing, I just was really surprised that she had one. She has a Givenchy. Is that how you say it? Givenchy? Givenchy. I don't know. She had a Givenchy that she had worn to Eleanor Roosevelt's funeral and for John Jr.'s christening. She would wear it now for Jack. She directed the kind of veil that she would wear. A full veil that would obscure but not conceal her face. She drew a curtain between herself and the public. This first lady before the assassination favored bright, solid colors so that people could see her. And this was now starting to move toward Jackie after. And she didn't know who that was yet. She knew the mother she would need to become. And Carolyn and John would not just be the children of a former president, mildly interesting relics of a past administration. They would be living legacies, requiring an upbringing that she would need to invent as she went along. But first, she needed to get them through the next few days. She hadn't even been the one to tell the children. We're told that the White House nanny, Maud Shaw, was the one who had broken the news. She told 5-year-old Caroline that her daddy had gone to heaven to be with baby Patrick, who had been so lonely. Well, little John, or who they called John's 3rd birthday would coincide with the funeral. and Jackie determined that her son would still have a party. He was too young to understand. Sorry, if y'all see a fly buzzing around, it's driving me bananas. I've done my best with the fly swatter, but if you see it, I'm just gonna let it fly. So there it is. Jackie directs Caroline and John to write a letter to their father, and she wrote 5 tear-stained pages addressed to "My darling Jack." It was an exorcism of sorts. Jackie expressing herself like the writer she was. To others, she spoke of only 2 things: what had happened in Dallas and what she wanted for the funeral. No one else could draw out her emotions. And so the letter she left with Jack in his coffin was as much for her as it was for him. She thought back to the loss of their baby Patrick, and she wrote of what she had said to him soon after, that she now knew she could suffer anything except losing Jack. The blow I could not bear. And yet here she was, bearing it. I think this is really a wonderful moment that we're given this glimpse of her processing her grief. I think it's a really good example too. Like, I've found at various points in my life that when I have huge emotions or something wildly difficult has happened, that putting my thoughts down on paper is often easier, and there's something about the act of either handwriting or even typing that gives your brain a moment to craft your actual internal experience in words and in a way that is different than talking. It kind of forces you to put a little bit of structure to it and make sense of it. And so she writes 5 tear-stained pages that are buried with him in the coffin. Within days of the assassination, she's written many letters. One was to Nikita Khrushchev, assuring him that Lyndon Johnson would seek the peace and nuclear detente that her husband had worked for. She also writes a letter to the newly widowed young mother of 3, Marie Tippett. Her husband, J.D. Tippett, had been shot to death in Oak Cliff, Texas, while trying to arrest Jack's assassin. There's interesting controversy about this, and I live close to Dallas, so if you guys would like little shorts of those places, I'd be willing to go and do that. We actually recently went and saw one of the boarding houses that Lee Harvey had lived in. All these places still exist, and they're relatively close to one another, so we could do a little Oak Cliff JFK tour if you guys wanted. Let me know in the comments. The handwritten condolence letter that Marie received on plain white paper, dated November 30th, 1963, so just a week after the assassination, came as a shock. Jackie wrote that she thought of Marie constantly, and that if there was anything Jackie could do for her ever, Marie had only to ask. I just thought it was really sweet that she thought to do this. She had such kindness, even in the middle of her own grief, and with a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, and moving out of the White House and dealing with your husband's funeral plans and all the things that must have been on her mind. It's such an interesting thing that she thought to stop and write this letter. When the funeral was over, Jackie greeted the mourners back at the White House with warmth and stoicism. She spoke with French President de Gaulle, and then she went upstairs to her son's 3rd birthday party. "I couldn't disappoint little John," she said. She found Britain's Prince Philip playing on the floor with him, and the image was almost too much. No title, no hierarchy or power structure could impede anyone from comforting and distracting a newly fatherless little boy who had just turned 3. I found this really charming. There's things that as you start to find out about Prince Philip, it doesn't seem like he was a particularly faithful husband. He seemed a bit like a playboy and resentful towards his wife sometimes, Queen Elizabeth. But here he is. This really warmed my heart, just seeing him get down on the floor, playing with John, taking notice of this little boy. He could have just been down there schmoozing with, President de Gaulle and President Johnson, and instead he's there playing with a 3-year-old. I think that was really sweet. With the funeral behind her, one day before burying her husband, she brings Pierre Salinger, one of Jack's most trusted advisors, and she tells him about her new life mission. "I have only one thing to do now," she said. "I have to take care of these kids. I have to make sure they grow up well. They have to get intelligent. They have to move forward to get good jobs. They have to have a whole, very important life, because if I don't do that for them, they'll spend all their time looking back at their father's death. And that's what they shouldn't be doing." She knew the chronicle of her husband's short administration had yet to be written. And before she moves on to this task of motherhood, she wants to wrap up the legacy of her husband. She thinks through the different journalists that they have known, and she didn't want to give exclusives to people who had covered for Jack's affairs. She thought of this man, Theodore White. Jack had admired him, and the feeling was mutual. He had written the definitive account of Jack's campaign, called The Making of the President, 1960. She thought that White would cast Jack in the best light. So 1 week after the assassination and the day after Thanksgiving, Life magazine, already on the stands with its JFK memorial issue, Jackie, in retreat at the Kennedy compound, summoned White. He's actually in the dentist chair when he gets the call, and he couldn't get up to the Cape fast enough. That night at 8:30, Jackie greets him. She's tall and proud in her chic casual wear, camel-colored cigarette pants, and black sweater. Her hair impeccable, her eyes clear. Her composure was in stark contrast to the rainstorm raging outside, and all of this played to a sense of theatricality. Jackie thrived in a crisis. She grew calm and still, and this was something she hadn't known about herself before now. Jackie sat on the sofa, and so White joins her. She is leading, but she's letting White feel as if he's in control. So she leans forward and kind of tilts herself toward him, making herself seem vulnerable and open. Jackie already knew everything she was going to say. She starts talking. She starts talking about herself first. "I'm not going to be the Witter Kennedy in public," she said. "When this is over, I'm going to crawl into the deepest retirement." She told White what had happened in the car after Jack was shot. She spoke of all the hysterical men, Jack's aides, and the priests at the hospital. Now she was still wearing Jack's wedding band, and she twisted it around her finger as she chain smoked and shared her story. She shows the ring that Jack had given her to honor dear baby Patrick. She knew the kind of color and detail that a journalist craved. So she shares stories that are almost like paintings. "Every time we got off that plane that day, 3 times they gave me the yellow roses of Texas. But in Dallas, they gave me red roses. I thought, how funny, red roses. So all the seat was full of blood and red roses." Jackie knew that people were curious about her, but she spoke only of what she would not do, of what she did not want. She said she would not go around accepting plaques. She didn't want to receive medals for Jack. She didn't want to be seen by crowds. She said she was going to focus on raising her children. She didn't know yet where they were going to live, but it wouldn't be in their old Georgetown house. White took notes longhand, and he was scribbling furiously as she spoke uninterrupted. He had barely asked a question. She was so focused and sure of what she wanted to say, even as she acted helpless and vulnerable. "There's this one thing I wanted to say," she said. "Jack, everything he ever quoted was Greek or Roman. It wasn't." This was the dramatist in Jackie, flowering as she soliloquized. By acting like what she was going to say was personal, that she was so carried away she was divulging information that she hadn't meant to, she knew that White would print it. "One thing kept going through my mind," she said. "The line from a musical comedy. I kept saying to Bobby, I've got to talk to somebody. I've got to share this one thing. It's been almost an obsession. This line from a musical comedy. At night before going to bed, we had an old Victrola. He'd play a couple of records and I'd get out of bed and play it for him when it was so cold getting out of bed. It was a song he loved. He loved Camelot. It was the song he loved most at the end. Sad, sad Camelot. Don't let it be forgot that for one brief shining moment there was Camelot. White knew this was patently untrue. Everyone who knew Jack Kennedy did. This was not a man given to poetry or romance or middle-brow Broadway musicals. Jack Kennedy wasn't the kind of husband who was home with his wife every night, cuddling up, cozying up, listening to the Victrola. At midnight, Jackie shows White to the maid's room where he set to work on his first draft. Life was holding the presses for this Jackie exclusive, literally at the cost of $30,000 per hour. He had made another note to himself to write simply. Yet he could not resist leading with the imagery of this dark and rainy night. He rhapsodized over Jackie's wide brown eyes and thoughtful stillness. When he was done, White handed Jackie his draft. She begins cutting mercilessly, editing whole passages. This was the deal. Life would get the exclusive if she got the final edit. So instead of White's long tirade about the raining and blah, 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 Jackie insists that the third sentence, a knockout sentence, should become the lead. She remembered how hot the sun had been in Dallas. Yes, that put the reader right there in the back of that car with Jackie, just before the first shot. It was all very compelling, foreboding, and intimate. Other memories, very private and frightening. But she also remembered, quote, mostly how all through the night they had tried to separate him from her, to sedate her, to take care of her. Jackie did not like that. A lachrymose line about Jackie still wearing Jack's ring, the closest thing she had for memory of him, she cut that out too. She wanted this piece moving at a fast clip until it reached the mythological ending that she had crafted for Jack. Sometime close to 2 a.m., White called his editors in New York and dictated the final draft, word for word, from her kitchen. Jackie stood over him to ensure that everything that she had edited and insisted on would end up published. And she was right to do so, because as she listens, she hears White giving the words and receiving pushback. They called the Camelot stuff laughable and completely overwrought and untrue. Jackie looked at White and she shook her head back and forth. It was her version or nothing. So as her first draft of history won out, the very last line, the kicker, written in her own cursive, for one brief shining moment, there was Camelot. That fairy tale would captivate America for decades to come, at the cost of many more women. In hindsight, what had she wrought? So, what do you guys think about all of this? She honors Jack in his death. She advances him beyond his merit. And she crafts this image that we know already at this point in the book. We know it's enticed Carolyn, it's enticed Mary, it's enticed Joan. This image that she's crafting is the same one that the Kennedys have used over and over again, and she's doing it with just more artistic style. I think it's fascinating, a little bit sad. I know how many women have been harmed by this carefully crafted image. Throughout this chapter, we got a picture of Jackie, the emotional difficulties. We got to see the emotional high of the happiest day of her life when she had a baby. We got to see how she reached out to everyday people like Dr. Finnerty, and the way that she learned how to have a difficult conversation with her husband. And then we get to see this art director walking through moments of grief, and yet with such purposefulness, such an eye toward the things that needed to happen in order for her husband's image to be crafted in the way she wanted. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Next few chapters we're going to read are called Stolen Youth. So I'll see you guys next time. Please leave comments, like, share, subscribe. Please like these videos so that more people can find them. I'm so appreciating the comments that are happening in the comments section. If you are not checking those out, please do. So many people pipe in with, they've read more biographies of one woman or this woman, or they've just read a lot about the Kennedys. And so a lot of people share their input. So it's definitely worth it to check out the comments. We'll see you guys soon. Have a great day. I hope you come back for the next episode for Pamela Kelly. Have a great day.